All right, guys, welcome to Wide Awake Radio. I'm Charlie McGrath, your host. It is the 19th day of October, Wednesday. Reginald, also known as DEMCAD, he is going to be joining us. I'm assuming he's waiting in the wings. I don't think I've received a message from Brett here yet, but I see him in the chat room. So if you are listening and not in the chat, head to wideawakenews.com. We have about 130 people in there right now. Wideawakenews.com, click on the Wide Awake Radio button, and you can join the chat. And you can also, we have about 60 people watching me do the program live. There's a link there as well to watch me do it on, watch me do the program on JTV. Thanks to everybody who is following the program now on Twitter. I made that announcement last night about, I think close to 100 people. No, I think it was like 60 or 70 people signed up since last night. So, and guys, I'm really starting to like this, and I'm starting to see the appeal of networking through social media, such as Twitter. Now, I don't know how long it's going to be around for, but I'll tell you this. You really can keep up with what's going on around the country, especially if you have contacts or have made friends with folks who are involved in either, Tea Party movement or Occupy movement or just frustrated people or alternative media all the way around. So if you are not signed up to follow us on Twitter, there's a Twitter button, a tweet, whatever, the bird button on the front page. There's also above the headlines or right next to the headlines is another link to follow us on Twitter, so please continue to sign up for that. I posted probably a dozen stories on there today that I found during the day that I thought were interesting, showing exactly where we're headed, and I send them out on Twitter, so you guys got those and you know what I'm talking about. And DEMCAD actually signed up today, or yesterday, and Dex did today. So get on Twitter, follow the program there. Follow DEMCAD on Twitter. Follow Dex on Twitter. Everybody's doing it. And here's the deal. I don't know, we know that they're using social networking, that a lot of just Main Street people are using it to tell what's going on. And this is the kind of information sources that we need because we're not getting the truth from the mainstream media. I'm uploading a video right now. DEMCAD put out an absolutely brilliant one today, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the stories I found this morning has me just completely and totally, almost speechless. I mean, I'm enraged. And if you're looking for a reason, and here's the thing. We still get a lot of people saying what this Occupy thing is about. And I'm shocked. Alternative media people, alternative media who've been following this program, people who've been following alternative media for a long time, either YouTube or this radio program, are just absolutely sold out to the notion that this anger is being generated from some think tank somewhere, that this is all part of some leftist communist conspiracies somewhere. Now, I know there's connections at the beginning of this movement in New York City with George Soros. We had Bob Chapman on the other night telling us his extensive research showed just that. But remember, and people who brought that to my attention, remember what he said following in that interview. Not that it was completely sold out to the left. Something happened with this movement that I don't think anybody expected. It's taking off like wildfire across this country and this planet. The reason people are in the streets, it has nothing to do, as far as I'm concerned, the core reason people are in the streets has nothing to do with the fact that everybody wants a free car, a free house, a free job, that they want their life taken care of cradle to grave. They want to retire when they're 18 years old, and they want to get 500 times their annual salary in a yearly stipend from the government once they retire at 18 and a half. Grand communist utopia is not what's driving this Occupy movement. And hopefully tomorrow night we have one of the leaders of the Occupy Denver program, and he is coming on the show, I think tomorrow. If not, then Friday for sure. But we'll talk to somebody who set one of these up to see what the goals are behind it. When you look at the videotape from a lot of these movements, if you follow the mainstream media, you'll see they'll put the most hippiest-looking individual, no offense, Miss C. Gypsy, monitor in the chat room. They'll put the most hippie-looking person they can find that has barely the brain power to put together a 10-word sentence, and they'll broadcast that person all over the mainstream media. But if you see alternative media, and when I say alternative media, I mean you, the people listening to me right now, who took their flip cam and went out to one of these protests, and they're videoing it. Fries with that, another monitor in the chat room, did just that here in Bozeman over the weekend. You know, these are intelligent mainstream people who have had enough. Why have they had enough? Why are they in the streets? What's the motivation? A story out today spells it out to a T. We have a group of international globalist banksters who together, combined, own a central banking system that has immersed the planet into indentured servitude. And they're not done yet. They're just getting warmed up. They're just starting this game. Bank of America has shifted, we don't know how much, up to $53 trillion potentially in derivatives from Bank of America to their Merrill Lynch division. This division is backstopped by $1 trillion in deposits. So when the CDS nightmare explodes because of all the derivatives are being held over the European debt load, when that explodes, there's $1 trillion of backstop in the Merrill Lynch division. People's money, right? But that's not even the half of it. This money, this $1 trillion in the Merrill division, is backstopped by who? The FDIC. That's you. That's me. So when this explodes, $53 trillion in derivatives, we don't know how much of it's wrapped up inside of Europe, but it's a lot. And at the request of their shareholders, Bank of America shifted all these derivatives over to the Merrill division so it would have FDIC insurance behind it. You and me backstopping more fraudulent failure. That is what's coming down the road. It's not stopping with them. I'll drop a story into the chat in a minute that'll show J.P. Morgan is thinking about doing the exact same thing. These banks are gearing up to lower the boom once again. And guys, ladies, you think 2008, 2009 was a transfer of fraudulent failure onto the people of the world? You ain't seen nothing yet. We've had 3.5 years of creating massive loads of sovereign debt in order to pay off too big to fail failure and in order to paper over this depression that the globe is in. Instead of going after and eliminating and destroying and collapsing these banks, we propped them up and made them more systemic than they've ever been, ever. And more systemic than any banking institution this planet has ever known. And they're about to implode the thing and make it all your problem. And when I say you, I don't care if you're listening to me in Canada, Mexico, England, Ireland. It doesn't matter. If you're listening to me and you can hear my voice, you are going to shoulder the burden for this failure. These candidates come on television last night in this debate, air quotes. If you're watching JTV, you saw me do it for real. On this debate, they want to come on and talk about the bullet point issues. It makes me literally sick. It was an hour and 4 minutes into it before the Federal Reserve was mentioned, and of course, it was Ron Paul that had to mention the Federal Reserve and the monetary policy that has led to the economy that's imploding. All these talking heads who are up there, every single one of them, even the ones who didn't vote for the bailout, every single one of them have the same talking points. We got to turn the economy around again. We got to get manufacturing back in this country. None of them are looking at the real reasons why we're in the condition we're in. None of them are addressing the fact that you're not going to bring manufacturing back to this country unless you make everybody in this country the same standard of living that they have in the deepest, darkest hole inside of China. There is no reality in politics. It's all pop culture garbage. The reality is hidden in the mainstream media. The reality is we're about to take another punch in the face that is going to put us down for the count. That is why people are in the streets today. That is why people will be in the streets tomorrow. That is why this movement is not going away. Do not swallow the bait of the mainstream media that this is nothing more than some cause, some ism, some color. It's nothing to do with any of it. It has to do with you have no future unless you go out and make a future for yourself and demand real change. Let these banks collapse. Make these banks collapse. They are utilities at this point. We own these banks at this point. All right, I went on too long. I'm sorry, Reginald. Reginald, I hope you're there. I don't have a message from Brett, but I'm assuming you're there. Can you hear me?
Sure. Oh, yeah, I'm here. I'm right here.
All right, man. Reginald, also known as DEMCAD on YouTube. Great commentator. Puts out videos all the time. I'm sure everybody's subscribed to him, but if you're not, please do subscribe to his channel and frequent host on this program when I decide to take a 3-day weekend or something. So, Reginald, welcome back to the program. I know a lot of people are excited to have you on here, and I've already had some requests via text and comments on my promotional video for you to talk about the need to bug out. We can get into that when you want to, but let's talk a little bit about your video today because I thought it was an excellent commentary.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm not going to protest. My protest is going to be a little bit different. I had a bank account with Wells Fargo in 2010. I shut it down when I went to Michigan. I still have one more account with a big, too big to fail bank. I pretty much keep no money in it. But the only reason why I have it is because I need that account to actually receive the money, and I'm in a situation where I'm responsible for paying a certain amount of bills. So what I'm doing for this year, I'm not even going to wait to New Year's. I'm working on a side job, a roofing job right now, and I'm going to take that money. I'm going to set up an account at a local credit union. And once I set that up, I'm going to shut down this bank account and send all my money towards that entity. That's going to be my protest.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Let me tell you, Reginald, you've been doing a public service for absolutely nothing for a long time. So as far as I'm concerned, you're pulling your weight and then a whole lot more.
Well, thank you, and you know I'm a big fan of what you're doing here, and just to sort of add on to what I was doing, essentially what's happening with Bank of America is that they invested a lot of money, if you want to call it invested, gambling, whatever, a lot of money in derivatives. Derivatives essentially is when you're betting on the value of an entity going up or down, whether it be houses or whatever. You're just betting on whether it goes up and down. You're not producing anything. You're not providing much of a product. It's just pure speculation. I consider a lot of it to be essentially fraud and junk. But anyway, they have $75 trillion with a T. I read this on Zero Hedge. $75 trillion, like you said, $1 trillion with a T. Now, that's the amount of exposure they're dealing with. And they're going to try to move some of that from Merrill Lynch, which is their investment arm, to their commercial arm. Now, what this means, just so people understand this, last year, in 2010, our GDP was about $15 trillion. $15 trillion. That gives you an idea how much this one bank has in actual exposure. That is absolutely incredible. The FDIC has no way of actually covering this. I mean, if they go down in flames, the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation or whatever, the federal government, they're not going to be able to cover this at all. Essentially, they're going to, like you said, they're going to have to run to the taxpayers and try to get them to pay for it. Right now, the Federal Reserve is saying, no, we don't want to pay for it. Well, no, the Federal Reserve is saying, yeah, you can go ahead and do it because obviously they won't be responsible. And now the FDIC is saying that they don't want to have anything to do with it because they don't want to back it up. And I'm going to let you jump in here because I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. Essentially, that's what's going on right now.
No, you're exactly right. What they're doing is it used to be if you were a bank holding company, right, you had FDIC insurance deposits because you were holding DEMCAD's money before he pulled it out and became roofer. He put his money into a bank, the FDIC insured it. You were a bank holding company, separated by law, by something called the Glass-Steagall Act, separated from an investment bank, right, because they can invest and make risky gambles, and if they fail, it's on them. There's no government or bailout coming. That's gone. Right? We saved capitalism by destroying capitalism. This was the mantra in 2008. Guess what? It's still in force. Of course the Federal Reserve thinks it's a good move. Of course they do. One of their ownership banks is in trouble. Of course they think it's a good idea. And yes, the FDIC is worried because they're going to be the ones with a black eye when this thing blows up in our face. And you have the Federal Reserve with the ability now to lend money at absolutely zero to one of their own holding banks that own them, and the taxpayer of this country on the hook through the FDIC for all the deposits that they have. They cannot lose. They create these derivatives, and they make bets, and they sell them. It's no different. It's not lost on me, the irony of these Republicans out in Las Vegas yesterday, because, they're like at home, right? They're like working on Wall Street or working in Washington, D.C. We'll make this giant gamble. We'll sell it off to people around the world. Then all of a sudden when it blows up, oh, bummer, we hit the double zero. We'll have the taxpayers pay for it. This is in the midst, it's unbelievable to me, Reginald, in the midst of all this global unrest, civil unrest that you've been talking about is coming our way, and it's here. I mean, it's here. If you deny it now, then, you need to look at a mirror and realize that you're not living in reality. Civil unrest is here globally. And in the midst of all this, in the midst of it, we have this move to shift all this known failure, fraudulent failure, gambling disease failure onto the backs of the American people. It's unbelievable to me. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, and just so people know, what I was trying to say in the video is that with their commercial aspect of it, basically the gambling aspect of their investment, which is Merrill Lynch, Bank of America controls Merrill Lynch. There's of course Bank of America, the commercial. Basically, I put my money in the bank account, and they give people loans and stuff. This basic commercial. What they're going to try to do is put some of those derivatives into the commercial aspect, which means FDIC is going to have to cover that. So that's a big threat there, and this is why I think they're really, really desperate. And I think the company is on the verge of, well, it's already dead, but what's happening is that the federal government has essentially propped them up. Well, they're reaching the end of the road. That's essentially what's happening with the Bank of America, and it looks like we're going to see that with other banks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the jockeying that's gone on over the last couple of weeks when we've had all this, whipsaw action on the markets, where you see, the debt load inside of Europe is going to collapse. Everybody thought it was going to be Bank of America first, but it wasn't. There's already been failure inside of Europe. It was Alexia. And when they shifted that $180 billion off into this bad bank scenario, putting that debt onto any French listeners who are listening tonight or Belgium listeners who are listening tonight, that was the first sign. This is what all the wrangling has been about for the last month. That's why Timothy Geithner went over to Europe begging them to leverage their bailout fund from $400 billion to several trillion euros, because it's going to hit. This disaster is absolutely known about by the powers that be. They know it's coming. They know it. I think they knew it in 2007, that we would take our failure, fraudulent failure, put it on the people of the world, run up their credit card, and then we'll collapse the whole thing. So they're circling the wagons. They're trying to protect the banking cartel because it's about to pop. And when it does, if you think that there's frustration in the streets now, well, Reginald, what's it going to look like? What's it going to look like when we start hearing too big to fail again? When that comes back into the lexicon, or when we start hearing trillions of dollars in CDS again, or when we start hearing, credit markets are freezing up, or we start hearing 1 million people are getting laid off. Can you imagine what the streets are going to look like in this country then?
Well, I was speaking with a friend, a guy who's on his 60s or 50s or so. He's a Vietnam veteran, and the guy obviously spent some time in the military, and he was talking about how when he was a kid there were riots in Detroit, and how there's like 1,000 people going up and down the street, and how people were carrying book bags, backpacks, and filled with rocks, and a person would come up behind them, grab a rock, and throw it, and they were throwing cocktails and he was just describing what it was like, and we're talking about basically the you-know-what hits the fan type of scenario, and that's something that I think is very likely in this country. You have to understand that one of the key words is interconnected. There's so much of this that's interconnected. So when one part of the organism, if you want to call it an organism, gets infected, it just spreads to other parts. Just like the European countries, they have a lot of debt in one another. They're holding you have England and you have Germany holding debt in places like Greece or Italy or whatever. Everybody's sort of connected. So when one person fails, the whole system sort of goes down like a dominoes. But even here in America, like for example, J.P. Morgan, every time we have almost 45. We have over 45 million people. I forgot to count at this point. Tens of millions of Americans collecting food stamps.
Right.
Those guys, they get paid every single time people use those cards. So if J.P. Morgan did collapse, what exactly would happen to those cards?
Well, that in and of itself should be reason to protest. And if I'm not mistaken, 37% of all the debit cards that are issued monthly for the 47 million people on food stamps go through 23 states, go through J.P. Morgan. So they get a piece of that action, right? And if you have to call on it, you're going to call somebody and talk to somebody inside a call room in India. So not only are they profiting off of misery, they're actually benefiting the economy of India instead of putting those jobs here in the United States. This is what happens, right, when you privatize what should be a utility. Well,
I mean, they basically started the mess. They played a big part in starting the mess in the first place. When you look at what the Federal Reserve did, the Federal Reserve is pretty much owned by private banks. So these entities pretty much created this mess in the first place. And not only were they able to buy out the politicians and get them to get the Federal Reserve to have the taxpayers take on more debt for them, but now they're making a buck off the misery they've created.
A lot of comments about Occupy meetings. HOPSAC is trying to figure out how to do their once a week night meeting. Yeah, I think this is going to continue to. Obviously, there's a lot of people can't camp out or whatever, and yet we'll see what the next 6 months brings. There might be more people have more time on their hands, but I mean that's the way these are shaping up. Is people are trying to put together organize rallies or meeting or marches, not quarterly or not once every year on day after 9/11 anniversary or something like that. They're trying to do this daily or weekly or every weekend, and I think we'll continue to see that. Yeah, somebody just put, or Walter's friend's wife just put in the phone number 877-342-6673. If you have a question you'd like to ask DEMCAD, and he's got a huge following in the room tonight. I'm afraid to type anything in there because I know I'm hogging up DEMCAD time. But if you have a question for DEMCAD, then please call in 877-342-6673 or post it into the chat room, and him and I are both in there. We'll monitor it as well. If you got out of the chat room doing the commercial, guess what? They're over, so come back in, wideawakenews.com, click on the Wide Awake Radio button. Reginald, we were talking about the current crisis, the crisis of reality that we're about to have unleashed on us. And you talked about the fact that J.P. Morgan makes money on the way up, and they make it on the way down, and now they make it on the misery of people, right? They're making it on the more poverty we have. Their poverty division does well, and it seems like everything's micro. I mean, we have these giant conglomerates now, and they just have all these divisions. Pretty soon we'll have the nursery division, and we'll have the gravedigger division, and they'll do well if we need to boost profits in the gravedigger division. Maybe we'll invade another country and kill off a bunch of people, and we'll have the gravedigger division will show a profit for the next quarter, or maybe the next fiscal year will be bright and cheery. The dividend will double because of the amount of deaths that ensue. In the name of more and more profit. I mean, I know that sounds extremely. It sounds like a bad sci-fi movie, but man, when you look at things, doesn't it seem that's the direction we're heading?
Well, I'm still waiting on the J.P. Morgan military contractors. Well, yeah, they're military. Never. Yeah, the J.P. Morgan military contractors. I wouldn't be surprised if they had any connections to some mercenaries at this point, but. I mean, since you're going to branch out, then why not? But, I was just thinking, Halloween's coming up, and I really don't know what I should say about this right here, but I was checking out Zero Hedge, and it said that America is set to surpass 100% debt to GDP on Halloween. I mean, it's sort of like insert bad joke here.
Yeah, well, you know what I thought you were going to say was the other story that came out today, that student loans have now surpassed credit card debt in the country, $1 trillion in student loans. So
don't get me started on that. I mean, my big butt has been climbing up on the roofs. Well, I've only done 2 in the last month or so, but whenever I can get a side job, I do it. And my big butt getting on the roof. Yeah, and then actually passing shingles to a roofer and hauling shingles up in wood up onto a roof and boards and tools and whatever, and cutting wood. It's just kind of bizarre. I mean, when I think about all those liberal art classes I took in college. Listen to some professor talk about some craziness.
Yeah, and I've had people say, what's a safe field to get into, as economic times continue to get worse and worse. And I've always, I've told people, get into something that will be a skill set that will be useful to somebody. Reginald's out repairing roofs, and if I'm not mistaken, your degree is in counseling
criminal
or
justice
something along those
and everyone's favorite, sociology, which is the study of society and social groups.
Oh man, well,
I could have been a probation officer, but then the public sector sort of crashed, and there wasn't.
You're going to see how society looks swinging a hammer, repairing roofs. It sounds like it. I'll tell you something. I've been in the building industry in one form or another for over 20 years, and there's two jobs that are the most despised jobs in this industry, in residential construction anyway, and that is a drywaller, doing drywall, but by far worse is a roofer. These guys are 40 years old, and they look like they're 900 years old because they're exposed to the weather all day, and they're on their hands and knees all day, and it's a miserable, miserable existence. So my hat's off to you. We do have
I'm not going to be doing that for much longer. I know the guy I'm working with, he's about 50 years old, and he feels the difference. His back and everything, so it's definitely not going to be cut out for a big guy like myself. And yes, and drywall is really obnoxious because it gets all up in your, the dust gets all up in your nose, and anyway. It really
it's horrible.
Crazy.
I mean, it's a tough way to make a living, and usually you have very young kids in college who are doing these jobs with one old broken down foreman who takes 15 handfuls of ibuprofen every day just to get out of bed. All right, we got a caller, Reginald, and he's from my home state, so I'm excited. I hope he's in town. I hope he's an Occupy member, and I hope he has some news for us. John from Montana, welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
Hello. I'm just the big question is, how are we all going to pay like $2 quadrillion back to the bad derivative bets, or the bad bets, or just to pay for anything to keep the system going? Obviously, we're probably not. So there's the problem. And so then what happens from there?
Well, Reginald, I'll throw that to you in a sec, but I'll give you time to think of the answer. What I see happening, John. Where in Montana are you, by the way?
Kalispell.
Okay, all right, beautiful area up there. This is
cloudy.
What's going to happen. Pardon me?
It's cloudy.
It is cloudy. Okay, well, it's dark here, so I'm sure it is there too.
Go ahead.
I can't tell. I know it's getting cold. What we're going to have, John, is if we look back to 2007, this nation was sitting at about $9 trillion, which is ridiculous, but $9 trillion in national debt. Now that's one metric of debt, right? But we'll use it because it's the one everybody knows: $9 trillion in national debt. Over the last 3.5 years, we've taken that $9 trillion in an attempt. At least verbally, the attempt was to save the economy. We've taken it from $9 trillion, spent $1 trillion plus every single year in deficit, and now we're sitting at the verge of $15 trillion with the ability to go to 16, which is guaranteed. They absolutely will do it. So what they'll do is they'll backstop, and you'll have entities like the Federal Reserve gobble up all these assets, all these derivatives, all these pieces of paper, and issue fresh, crisp, digitally created dollars to these banking institutions in order to cover their books, cover their bets. That debt will become our debt at that point. And that will mean you'll start hearing austerity like you've never heard it before. When they talk austerity, right, that's how are we going to get money out of the people of the country. Now, it's really in vogue right now in governments around the world to start talking about we're going to go after government workers. We're going to cut their salaries, cut their pensions, cut their numbers. But austerity doesn't end at the government payroll. Austerity is coming to everybody. Everybody. That's increased taxes. That's, you name it. If we had a piece of legislation that suddenly said, well, in order to fund the government, we're going to gobble up all the 401ks and we're going to invest them into bonds in order to keep the government functioning, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And you would see the mainstream media and the politicians on both sides championing this idea. So just because there isn't enough money, and there isn't, you're right. The amount of derivatives out there has been estimated in the quadrillion range, right? That's all the world's GDP for forever. There isn't enough money to pay it, but I don't think that's the point. I think the point is you control people, you control populations, you control nations by controlling their debt. And as long as we honor that debt and pretend that it's real and pretend that it's something that we're responsible for, then we will be nothing more than this flock of debt slaves that can be led down the path that they want us down. I think that's why this Occupy movement is probably I can't say this for sure, but I believe it's probably our last chance. This either gains momentum and everybody comes on board and we look at the real issues that have led the world to the point it's at now, and we demand that these entities not only be turned into public utilities, that they be literally destroyed and the people who brought us here put in prison. Until that happens, we don't stand a chance. I'm hoping this movement leads to that.
I can't see how we can't get out of superinflation here.
Well, that doesn't benefit. See, this is why this is my conspiratorial hat coming on now, John. This is why I don't think we're going to see that. That doesn't benefit the too big to fail, right? It doesn't benefit them to hyperinflate my ounce of silver to $500 an ounce. It doesn't, because I'm no longer a debt slave. I can pay off my assets I can pay off my debt with assets that I have that have hyperinflated in value. But it does behoove them to collapse the planet with a deflationary spiral, because they're the ones sitting on all the money. Even if their own assets are depreciating, who cares? You have, instead of $1 trillion, you have $500 billion. Well, you can go buy the United States for $1 billion now because we've had this massive deflationary depression. So I don't think. So
how do they do? This is what I don't understand. How do they do the deflation? I mean, it'd be a super deflation. How is that going to work?
Well, if you and I want to get Reginald in on this, but if you look at what happened in 2008 when we had a credit freeze, money stopped flowing. It just stopped, right? So everything started to fall in value. People were selling off their equities. They were selling off their stocks and bonds. They were selling everything because they wanted to get rid of it before it fell in value. So you saw oil go from $140 a barrel down to whatever the bottom was on it, $30 a barrel. It all fell in nominal fiat dollars. But deflation occurs when you have a credit freeze, when you have the prospect of demand absolutely falling off a cliff. You have the value of goods and services fall. So I think that is the path we are on, and we saw a little taste of it a few weeks ago when we went from $40 on silver to $29 on silver. We saw a bigger taste of it in 2008 when silver fell 50%, oil fell quite a bit more than that. But I think that is the game plan, because then you have this elite core that can come in and dominate. Now, dominate, not just own mortgages and private assets. They can start getting into the government utility business, the sovereign assets of a nation. They can start owning everything, and they can buy it on the cheap. Reginald, let me get you in here. And
thank you.
John, you betcha. And you don't have to go. I just want to get Reginald's take on your question.
Okay.
First, if Russia and China get their act together and they create a currency that's actually backed by a real commodity, then and other Asian countries jump on board, then that could be a situation where central banks all around the world, especially in Asia, send their dollars back to the U.S. And that will lead to a big increase in supply here. That could be inflationary, and that could pretty much be the end of the road for the U.S. dollar, especially if some Middle Eastern countries decide, okay, we're going to stop selling our dollars exclusively we're going to stop selling our oil exclusively in dollars and accept other currencies, especially this new hypothetical Russia-China currency, for example. That could be a scenario. If that happens, then you're looking at some serious inflation. If we have a situation where the derivatives finally bring the banks down, I should say, and they're asking for another bailout. I think the best solution is going to have to be for the U.S. government, and this probably isn't going to happen. They're probably going to say we're going to wipe off all the derivatives and declare it fraudulent. We're not going to pay the Federal Reserve their interest or anything. We're going to bust up the banks and basically use the real assets for smaller banks or whatever. We're going to force them if any of these people want to keep their jobs, they're going to have to be working for a lot smaller entities. That'll be something that is a little bit more manageable. That's something that could happen, but realistically, if they there wouldn't be any way that they can actually bail out all these banks. It's just too much money. I mean, the president would have to issue an executive order to actually require that monopoly money get transferred into actual money, actual Federal Reserve dollars or something like that, for them to even come close to trying to create the amount of dollars they would need to actually cover all that. So once that happens, it's pretty much the end of the game. There's no way they're going to be able to bail people out. I think what they will do is devalue the currency. That's something that they may try to do. They may try to issue new dollars, and whatever money you have in your bank account may, say if it was $100,000 in real money, well, after the devaluation, you may only be able to buy $30,000 worth of items that you would have been able to buy before. So that's something that may happen.
Well, I've heard that where they have a bank holiday and then you got money is worth half as much the next day.
Yeah, and it's happened before in the Depression and in the 30s. They did just that. They confiscated all the gold, they revalued it, and devalued the dollar, and so that can be done. I personally, I don't, because we're not on a standard like that where you can just revalue an asset that's based on I don't think they need to do that. I think they can. I think they'll bring the world to the edge which we're at right now, and I think they're going to offer a too big to fail solution, which will be something along the lines of what you're talking about, Reginald, where you have, the super financial governance entity like the IMF, of which Timothy Geithner is our representative to, will have something like the SDR step in and say, this is how we save the world, and then maybe your SDR, your special drawing rights, is valued in dollars in one amount one day, one the next. So it's going to be. Obviously, there's going to be that critical mass moment, and hopefully it comes from people protesting, people saying enough is enough, and the critical mass is we eject central bankers globally, and we have a meeting of nations to settle debt like we used to back in the days before central banking cartels. But time will tell. If we don't, we will be offered a solution, and it will be a global governance, global financial governance. John, I greatly appreciate the call.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you betcha. Anything else you wanted to add?
I don't know what to say.
All right, man. Well,
it's pretty bad all the way around.
Amen. But hang tight up there in Kalispell, and I appreciate you listening and
Thank you.
calling in with a question. You bet. Thank you, Reginald. We burned up some time there. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left. And I'm going to address the question that I got on my phone before the program, which is, are you, bugging out? Are you getting ready to bug out? Do you think that's in the imminent future? Or where are you even going to bug out to if you do bug out?
Yeah, where am I going to go? If I had some money, I would have some property out in Shiawassee County or some other county up north, actually, north of Genesee County, some property I can go to where I have a bunker or whatever. If I was going to bug out or something, you need money for that type of stuff. Realistically, most of us are not going to be able to bug out. This is an urban country. Most Americans live in the city or in the suburbs. They don't have any secluded location to go to. They don't have any family members who have farms like we did in the 1930s. So if we go to a depression, it's going to be much worse on us. So realistically, I'm not going to bug out anywhere. I'm basically going to have to hunker down right here in Flint, Michigan. When we reach a point where people aren't able to access general resources, food, or not be able to afford them, there will definitely be some rioting, and I'll have to deal with that here. My bug out bag is essentially an emergency bag. It's for whatever emergency I think I'll have to deal with. It has food, it has water, has a first aid kit, it has a water filter, some tools, basic stuff. That's what's realistically going to be happening for me.
You're bugging in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you and Dex and Warren, of course, are welcome to come here to Montana, where we have plenty of space. So and hopefully, we don't see the kind of carnage that some of these urban areas are already starting to see. And to that point, how are things in the battlefield? Your area is still the most oppressed. It's probably running a race with the Gulf Coast as far as standard of living misery. Are you seeing any improvements there? Any optimism coming your way?
Well, yeah, they're definitely building a lot of houses around the college area. So there's definitely money being put into that. But in terms of actual production and actual middle-class jobs, obviously I'm not seeing a lot of those pop up anywhere. What I am seeing is that the city is really it's really empty. There's so many businesses that are just empty, and it just looks barren. You see all these houses where they're pretty much, they don't exist. You just see a big hole or some rubble where it's been burnt down, and all you see is a chimney.
Yeah.
So I mean that's what Flint looks like.
Was it Flint or was it Flint or Detroit? I know when I was in Buffalo, I mean there's areas that are just they're abandoned. You know, you can buy a house for $1.
Flint and Detroit.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah, Flint is just a smaller version of Detroit in almost every way. Basically, they're both former industrial superpowers in a sense, or powerhouses. GM used to be in Flint, and there's a lot of auto industry in Detroit, and a lot of them moved out, a lot of them moved factories overseas, and they were both hit economically hard in the 1980s. They both had crack epidemics really affect them, massive crime waves, a lot of homicides. They're still the two most dangerous cities in the entire country, consistently high up on that list. The only difference is Detroit is bigger, with maybe 800,000 people, and Flint has about 100,000 people, and Detroit has, 90% blacks maybe, and Flint has 55% black. That's about the difference. I mean, it's just basically a smaller version of Detroit.
Are you missing Alaska yet?
Oh, yeah, but it's very expensive to live there, and, you know, there's some responsibilities I have to take care of here, but yeah, I'm going to try to get my family to leave Michigan.